O'Connor from the Palmer Public Library, and this recording is part of our online 2020 summer reading program, Imagine Your Story. It is brought to you by the Palmer Public Library, the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, Mass Library System, and the Boston Bruins. Miss Angie, the youth librarian, has asked her fellow librarians to share fairy tales and folk tales from their own culture. Special thanks today to David Hyde Costello, our wonderful library friend who will be drawing the images and illustrations you will see while I'm telling a story from my Irish heritage. In fact, the story I'm going to tell you today is a story from Ireland long ago. Most of the stories I've heard from the Celtic culture are about wee folk, which means tiny, and perhaps you know them too. You heard stories with pixies and fairies and leprechauns. Well, this story is a wee bit different because it's about very big folk. Can you guess? Yeah, it's about giants. And not just one and not just two, but it has 3 giants. It's about a real place in Ireland that you can visit someday, and a story that was imagined to explain this unusual magical place. The Legend of the Giant's Causeway. Long, long ago, there lived a giant named Finn McCool. He was the biggest and strongest and mightiest giant in all of Ireland and all the world. His voice could be heard for miles around. He lived happily with his wife Una on the Antrim coast. At the same time, there lived a giant named Benadonner across the sea on the Scottish coast. Benadonner believed that he was the biggest and strongest and mightiest of all the giants in all of Scotland and all the world. He constantly shouted at Finn from across the water. Tired of all the giants taunting, Finn finally decided to settle once and for all who was the biggest, the strongest, the mightiest giant of all the world. Finn started to build a path to Scotland, and that was big enough and strong enough and mighty enough to hold the biggest and strongest and mightiest giant of all the world. With his enormous hands, he drove thousands of stone pillars straight into the land and sea. And when Benadonner heard what Finn was doing, he decided to build a path from Scotland to meet up with Finn's path. The 2 giants worked vigorously for weeks, building their giant causeway toward each other. Finally, late one evening, Finn's path from Ireland met the path from Scotland. Finn was delighted and was about to run across to battle Benadonner when he saw him near the shore, already asleep for the night. Finn was shocked. The Scottish giant looked as though he might be a wee bit bigger, or a wee bit stronger, or maybe a wee bit mightier than Finn. Since Benadonner was asleep and had not seen him yet, Finn hurried back to his house. Finn told his wife Una that she must hide him or that they had to leave immediately and never return. Una, who was very clever, told her dearie giant husband not to worry. Una would devise a cunning plan. Overnight, they worked tirelessly to prepare for the next day. Una told Finn to build a huge cradle, while Una made a giant-sized baby clothes and baby bonnet. Then Una directed Finn to retrieve an extra-large boulder and put it on the kitchen shelf. Meanwhile, Una made a large batch of cheese, which looked like a smaller boulder once she placed it on the shelf next to the extra-large boulder. Una sent Finn to collect iron plates and pans from the neighbors. Finally, Una baked many loaves of bread and baked those iron plates and pans into some of the loaves. In the morning, Finn dressed himself in the giant-sized baby clothes and pretended to sleep in the enormous cradle. Later on, Benadonner knocked on the door. Whomp, thump, bam, shaking the whole house. When Una opened the door, she did not let herself react to the size of the tremendous giant. Her home had an enormous doorway, and this giant had crouched down to fill it and was blocking out every bit of sunlight. "I am looking for the fellow who calls himself Finn McCool," roared the giant in a voice that shook the walls of the house. Una sat calmly rocking the cradle and working on some mending. To look at her, one would have thought that this was an everyday occurrence. "And who might you be?" she asked. "That's no matter," growled the giant. "I've come from Scotland to see him, and I'm in a hurry." "Oh, you must be that foolish fellow who thinks he wants to have a battle with Finn," suggested Una. "Foolish," roared the giant. "Show me where he is, and you will soon find out which one of us is foolish." Una said, "I'm very sorry, but Finn's away and will not be back until tomorrow. He waited for you as long as he could. You see, you took so long to arrive, he decided that you must have become frightened and had turned back. So off he went to attend to some business. Just as he left, he said to me, 'If that fellow from Scotland gets here while I'm gone, treat him well, feed him well, and get him to stay. Then we will finally settle who is the biggest and strongest and mightiest giant in all the lands. Now come right in, dearie. I will give you a bite to eat,' said Una." Inside, where he could straighten himself up, he looked more terrible than before. "Who is that?" asked the giant, pointing to Finn in the cradle. "That's Finn's wee babe," she answered. "I wish you would be quieter while you're in here. Baby's just beginning to cut his teeth, and he's very cross if he awakens suddenly." When Ben and Donner saw the size of the giant baby in the big cradle, he was very surprised and a wee bit worried. If the baby was that big, his father must be enormous, he thought to himself. Now the woman busied herself before the fire. "Dear me," she sighed, "this fire draws so poorly. The wind is in the wrong direction. If Finn were here, he would just turn the house so the fire would do better." "What Finn can do will only be a small task for me," said the giant. He went outside, took the house by one corner, and turned it so that it faced in a different direction. Una was frightened to see this incredible display of strength, but she believed in her plan, so she continued to carry out the steps. When the giant came back, she remained very calm. "Well, how was that?" asked the giant. "The fire draws better," she admitted, "but you did it very clumsily. I thought you were going to shake the house to bits. Finn lifts it so easily that he disturbs nothing on the shelves and never wakes the baby. But of course, you're not as strong as Finn." At that moment, Finn dressed up as the wee babe pretended to wake and cry. And Una sighed again. The giant was getting the sense that his strength made no impression. He looked around the room to see if he could find something else to talk about. He saw the giant-sized boulder and the smaller rock on the shelf. "Perhaps you will tell me why you keep those stones on the shelf," he asked. "Oh, that," said Una, as if it could be of no importance. "That is just a little trick of Finn's. He uses it to practice on in the mornings." "Ho-ho!" laughed the giant. "Why should he practice with such a small boulder as that?" He picked up the boulder and tossed it from hand to hand as though it were an apple. "He keeps up the strength of his fingers with it," answered the woman. "Each morning he squeezes the water out of a boulder. If you are as strong as Finn, you can do the same." The giant took the stone in one hand and squeezed with all his might and main. Of course, no water could really come out of a solid rock. "Perhaps if you use both hands, you might get a few drops," Una said. Once more, he took up the rock and squeezed harder than ever, with no result. The baby in the cradle let out a hearty cry. "Poor wee babe," said the woman. "He is sorry for you. His father lets him practice on a small rock." She gave Finn the cheese. Finn took it in his 2 hands and squeezed it, letting the water stream on the floor. He let out a coo and a gurgle, and the giant was amazed. "That must be the biggest and strongest baby I've ever seen," he admitted. "It would have to be to belong to Finn McCool," Una replied. The giant seemed to be thinking deeply. Perhaps he now doubted his wisdom in challenging the father of such a big, strong baby. Soon, Una took one of the loaves from the cupboard and handed it to the giant. "Take this," she said. "It will help fill your belly and get your strength back." The giant thanked her and bit down into the bread. As it was one of the loaves with an iron skillet inside, all he succeeded in doing was to break off two of his teeth. "What's the matter?" asked the woman. "Maybe those breads are too hard for you. Finn wouldn't eat them because they were too soft." She passed the giant one more of the iron-filled loaves. Once more he bit into it, and again he lost more teeth. "You say Finn doesn't like bread as soft as that?" he asked. "He won't touch them," she answered. "He leaves them for the baby." She took one of the ordinary loaves and gave it to Finn in the cradle. The giant looked on to see what happened. Finn ate the bread ravenously. The giant was more puzzled than ever. He called for yet another loaf and bit into it with all the strength of his jaws. It would be hard to tell just how many teeth he lost this time. He could not get a bite off that bread. The woman gave Finn another bread, and again it went down in a hurry. "And you say he is just getting his teeth? I certainly wonder at such big and strong and mighty teeth," said the giant. Ben and Donner decided in that moment that the biggest and strongest and mightiest baby must have the biggest and strongest and mightiest father in all of Ireland and all the world. He ran out on the bridge as fast as he could. His heavy footfalls pushed many of the stones deeper under the water as he ran. Then he began ripping up the causeway behind him so that Finn could not follow. Ben and Donner never tried to come back, and he never taunted Finn again. Finn McCool remained the biggest and strongest and mightiest giant in all of Ireland. And most importantly, Una was, of course, the cleverest giant in all the world. To this day, on the Irish shore and out into the water, you can see some of the stone pillars. People call this the Giant's Causeway. And this story of Finn McCool explains how it happens to be there. This version of the legend of the Giant's Causeway was created by combining many resources, including a Project Gutenberg edition of Legendary Heroes of Ireland by Harold F. Hughes. Other illustrated versions of this legend can be found from your library. Now, a little bit more about folktales and fairy tales. They are very, very old stories. They are stories that were passed on from generation to generation. With each retelling, a little bit may change, so we end up with lots of variations of a story and many different adventures for the characters. These stories also come from a time when most people did not have books. Most stories weren't written down, and many people couldn't read. Can you even imagine not having books or not being able to borrow books from the library? Well, I don't really wish for you to imagine that, but I do wish you would imagine your own story. You can learn about stories from different cultures and weave them together into a completely new story of your very own. You can call us at the library and ask for books that have collections of folk and fairy tales, stories that have dragons and fairies, princesses, and of course giants. And sometimes they may have grandmothers or clever insects, and occasionally a really big potato, or even spaghetti that might take over an entire town. And if you write your own story, please let us know about it at the Palmer Public Library. We would love to hear from you, and we hope to see you soon. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.